Hello and a very warm welcome to the 51%, a show about the women shaping our world. I'm Haxie Meyers-Belkin. Coming up in the show today, as polls predict a surge in support for far-right parties in upcoming European elections, what could a lurch to the right mean for women's rights and abortion in particular? I'll be speaking to Jéromine Andolfatto, a policy and campaign officer with the European Women's Lobby. The Enigma machine at Bletchley Park is the stuff of legend, widely credited with providing the intelligence that made the D-Day landings possible. An exhibition lifting the veil on the contribution of dozens of women whose top-secret code-breaking work helped change the course of World War II. And fresh from claiming gold for Bulgaria at the 2024 European Championships, Iranian dissident and taekwondo star Kimia Alizadeh sets her sights on the Paris Olympics. We take a look at her incredible journey so far. Voters across the EU are gearing up to cast their ballots for a new European Parliament, as pollsters across the continent predict a surge in support for the far right. Specifically, the far-right Identity and Democracy group and the right-wing European Conservatives and Reformists group look set to hold more seats than ever before. Locally, parties affiliated with these groups have a proven track record of seeking to erode hard-won rights, including abortion access and gender equality legislation. Just remember, for example, Poland's near-total abortion ban in 2020 or Viktor Orban's government in Hungary requiring women to listen to their fetus's heartbeat before being allowed to access the procedure. Well, watching all of this very closely is Jéromine Andolfatto, a policy officer with the European Women's Lobby, who joins me now. Thank you very much for being with us here on France 24 today. Just how worried are you about this surge of support for the far right?
Well, it's hard to predict for certain what will be the composition of the European Parliament after the election, but you can see, like the projection do show, that the governing coalition with the right and the left and Renew, the Social and Democrats and Renew, is meant to have still a majority, but a weakened majority. And as you mentioned, ID and ECR from the far right are supposed to have a surge in the representation in the parliament. This would be worrying for women's rights indeed, because when you look at what happened at member state level, you mentioned Poland, for instance, but we can also mention Italy, the legislation passed, there's been a weakening of the safe access to abortion for women, for instance. So it's pretty worrying when you look at the track record and what happened at member state level. For instance, in Italy, a few weeks ago, the Senate approved a law with an amendment from Brothers of Italy allowing anti-abortion movement to enter abortion clinic to give advice to women seeking abortion. So it's pretty worrying indeed.
Now, we're talking, of course, about legislation at an EU level. How would women feel the impact of any legislative changes in their daily lives? Of course, we're talking about changes at an EU level here.
Yeah, well, abortion is regulated at member states level, but the parliament has always been really supportive, encouraging member states to remove any obstacle in the access to safe abortion at member state level. So the parliament has been voting different resolutions, supporting the right to abortion and really telling member states to not use the excuse of national legislation to impede the access to abortion. At the European Women's Lobby, we also campaign for the right to safe abortion to be included in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. So yeah, we're looking at the EU level, and the EU has an impact. What happened in France, for instance, we're hoping that that will be an inspiration also for member states in the EU to safeguard the rights to abortion for all women.
Now, a lot of the leaders of right-wing and far-right parties in the EU are women. Think of Marine Le Pen here in France, Giorgia Meloni in Italy. There are others, of course. How do you explain the fact that so many women are leading these far-right parties?
I do not know. I think, they have access power, and unfortunately, they're not really champions of human rights, quite the contrary. However, I do believe it's important to remember that, what is important is to have equality in terms of representation at decision-making positions, so to have women there, but also to have progressive feminist leaders. So I think that's what we've been campaigning for. And in the previous mandate, we have seen what a difference can progressive feminist women leader make. We had, for the first time, a president of the European Commission with a commissioner for equality and a portfolio on women's rights and gender equality. And their team passed a lot of significant legislation for women's rights. For instance, the Directive on Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, the Women on Board Directive, also the EU accession to the Istanbul Convention. So when you do have progressive leaders, feminist leaders and progressive women, it does make a difference. So it's also the fact that, having some women accessing power that are from far right and do not defend women's rights is really unfortunate, but it doesn't mean it should disqualify all women from accessing this decision-making position. I think that's important to remember too.
And do you think that parties on the left, also in the centre, are sufficiently addressing women's rights in the run-up to the European elections?
Some parties are addressing women's rights more than the other. For us, there are a lot of topics that matters. For instance, combating women's exploitation, sexual exploitation, championing women's economic independence, parity, democracy, etc. And most of these topics are not given enough focus in the election. And one of the major problems we see is that it still is seen as a women's only issue, when it is not. Reaching equality, gender equality and equality between women and men would be beneficial for society at large, for men and boys too. But what is also important to recall, especially for the party campaigning for the EU election, is that there is a democratic gap between European citizens and the institutions. And addressing women, addressing their concerns, their needs, is critical if you want to bridge this democratic gap, if you want the EU policies to be more representative and more responsive. So there is a need to do better. That's why we are issuing a pledge to EU candidates to support women's rights and to commit to women's rights once elected. So they can go and sign this pledge on our website, but they need to be given more visibility.
Jéromine Andolfatto, I'm so sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. Jéromine Andolfatto, Policy and Campaign Officer with the European Women's Lobby. Thank you very much. The 6th of June marks 80 years since the D-Day landings, the largest seaborne invasion in history and a pivotal moment in the Allies' liberation of Western Europe from Nazi rule. Vital military intelligence for the Normandy landings was produced at Bletchley Park. Alan Turing's work with the Enigma code-breaking machine is well documented. Less so the work of dozens of women who worked alongside him and who were sworn to secrecy for decades. Leo McGuinn and Charlie James take a look.
85 kilometers north of London is the historic Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing famously cracked the Nazis' Enigma code, a key moment for the Allies in winning World War II. But he wasn't alone. At least 77 women played a key role alongside Turing. Until recently, they were forgotten. Sally Waugh is on a mission to change that. It all started when she came across an article mentioning her old friend Jane.
A lady called Jane Reynolds was mentioned as having been at Bletchley, and I thought, I wonder if that's the same woman that I know. So I did then speak with her family, and they said, yes, she was there, but she'll never talk to you about it because she signed the Official Secrets Act.
Through extensive research, Waugh identified almost 80 women secretly recruited for code-breaking work. Each came from Newnham College at Cambridge University. They intercepted and registered messages, helped build and operate code-breaking machines, but all were sworn to secrecy, and their work went unnoticed.
They can't get a proper reference because nobody could say what they did. So they were said to be entirely satisfactory in their work, which is no reference for getting a good job. So they lived with the pain of it, they lived with the anonymity of it.
The women are now unmasked and recognized, though many of their family members died without ever knowing what they achieved.
With an impressive string of taekwondo accolades under her belt, Iran's first female Olympic medalist is gearing up for this year's Olympic Games in Paris. But if Kimia Alizadeh does win a spot on the podium, the green, white and red flag draped over her shoulders won't belong to Iran, but to Bulgaria. Charlotte Hughes and Alice Broga take a look at her extraordinary journey so far.
A leading figure in taekwondo for nearly a decade, Kimia Elizadeh appeared more determined than ever as she prepared to fight for Bulgaria in the European Championships. Bulgaria became Elizadeh's new home after she fled Iran in 2020. It marked the start of a new life and a new set of challenges for the 25-year-old athlete.
Of course, it's hard when you leave your country and you face a lot of new things, such as new language, new culture, and new people. And it is hard. It's a new start. I have to start it from beginning. I feel here is my second home, and I want to represent Bulgaria in my competition from now on.
Elizadeh made history in 2016 when she became Iran's first female Olympic medalist, winning bronze at Rio's Olympic Games. But 4 years later, she fled her home country, referring to herself in a post on social media as, quote, one of the millions of oppressed women in Iran. Government officials were quick to criticise her, and she began to receive threats online. In 2020, Elizadeh represented the refugee Olympic team in Tokyo, facing an Iranian opponent, which she describes as an unusual experience.
It's a weird feeling because in Tokyo, I fought against Iran, and which she was my best friend and my roommate. It's really a weird feeling. I can't explain the words. But this is the fight, this is the game, and every athlete doing their best to represent their country.
Elizadeh, who says she's aware that she has become a role model for young people, wants to add to her impressive list of accolades. After winning gold for Bulgaria at the 2024 European Championships, she's aiming for the top spot on the podium at this year's Olympics in Paris.
Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of the 51%. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again next week.